Hi everyone, welcome to my next MondAI BAIgel episode. My today guest is David Gunkel, professor of media studies at Northern Illinois University and professor of philosophy at Wazarski University. David, it's great you were able to join me.
Yes, thank you. It's nice to be here.
You're an author of Concept of Robot Rights. I read all your books, but for our listeners who may not be very familiar with your work, could you explain what you mean by providing rights to robots?
Right. No, it's a good question because I think often when we hear the word rights, we automatically think human rights because that's
Yes.
the way we talk about rights. And human rights are a very specific category of rights that apply to a particular human being. So it belongs to human beings and not other creatures. But rights, really, when you get right down to it, are just the way in which we recognize the manner by which we distinguish who has certain sorts of standing and capabilities in social relationships. So we can talk about animal rights, we can talk about rights of the environment, rights of nature. We can talk about rights with a lot of different things. And really, there's an American jurist named Wesley Hohlfeld who said that rights are really simple powers, claims, privileges, and immunities that we grant to one entity so that they are recognized in both moral decision making and in law as having a certain kind of status. And so when we're talking about robot rights, we're talking about a very specific set of recognitions that need to be applied to the robot, not necessarily because the robot deserves it, because it has some sort of dignity, because it doesn't, but because we need it to fit into our social world. And one of the ways in which we do that is by giving other things rights so we know what they are and how we were to relate to them on day-to-day sorts of interactions. So it's more about us than it is about robots.
In my research work, I was interested in future generation rights as one of the concepts of such specific rights. But can you elaborate a bit why we need to give AI systems or robots the rights? So if we give rights to future generation, we care about next humans.
Yes.
If we care about environment rights, we care about us in the context of clean water, clean air, and our health and life. So
Yes.
why should we recognize rights of AI systems?
Yeah. So I think we got to distinguish between natural rights and legal rights. You and I and future generations would have presumably natural rights, rights based on who we are by nature. The rights of an artifact are going to be much more like the legal rights that we accord to other artifacts. So, right now, we do live in a world where artifacts that we have created have rights. We call those artifacts corporations. Corporations under law have rights and responsibilities. Why? Because we want to be able to sue them for wrongdoing, and we also want to be able to have them have a certain position in our social world where our laws can recognize them as subjects of the law and not just objects of the law. So I'll give you a really good example of how robot rights is probably going to play out. Right now in the US, 12 states have laws that they've recently written granting the rights of a pedestrian to delivery robots. So we have these robots rolling around the street, delivering packages and food and things. And we had some situations where they were in the crosswalk and cars could hit them and obviously take out the robot. So we needed to use the existing legal apparatus that we have at our disposal to create a way of figuring out who has the right of way in the crosswalk. And the way that the legislature has decided to resolve this very practical problem is to say, well, when the robot is on the street and in the crosswalk, it has, and this is a direct quotation from the law, all the rights and responsibilities of a pedestrian. Now, this doesn't mean we're recognizing the robot as a legal person. It doesn't mean that we're giving them the right to vote. It means we're giving them a very specific recognition so that we can mitigate conflict on the streets when automobiles and these robots are sharing the same space. So this is kind of how this is going to happen. It's not going to be a big top-down robot invasion kind of thing like you see in science fiction. It's going to be a slow bottom-up kind of decision made by courts and legislatures as we try to navigate the new social complexities of intelligent and social machines.
So I had a few guests when we discussed AI in the context of intellectual property rights, and we were discussing if AI systems are just tools or co-creators, and what they think about it. And of course, they have IP rights background, so both of my guests agreed that they are tools only. What would you say? What's your position about
Yeah.
it? Should they
So,
be recognized somehow different?
so let me answer in two ways. One is when you talk to the artists that are working with these new tools, many of the artists are saying it no longer feels like a tool. It feels like a collaborator. It feels like I'm working with the entity that is the AI. People like Holly Herndon, who does this in music, people like Mark America, who does it in literature. They're all beginning to speak about their AI tools no longer as tools, but as a collaborator. And they're giving some credit to the AI for innovating, inventing, creating some new content. But I think the question about whether or not it can hold IP is less about whether we believe it is a creator or not a creator, and more having to do with how we define the legal standing of who can hold IP. So there's a guy named Ryan Abbott. I don't know if you talked to him, but Ryan Abbott has this project called the Artificial Inventor Project. And what he's doing is he's going around the world trying to file a patent application on behalf
Mhm.
of an AI called Davis.
Yeah.
And he has been unsuccessful in getting the IP recognized for the AI in the US and the UK. But not because the courts have decided that the artifact did or didn't do something, but because of the way the law is written. In the US and the UK, only natural persons can hold IP. But in South Africa and Australia, the AI is an inventor and it holds the IP over what it created. And that's because of the way the law is written in South Africa and Australia, which doesn't have this natural person prerequisite. So, right now, you can see already, globally speaking, we have a patchwork of decisions regarding whether the AI can hold IP or not. In the Northern Hemisphere, it can't. In the Southern Hemisphere, it can. And inevitably, it's going to be very different across jurisdictions.
In fact, this Davis case was discussed in my podcast. So if you wish, you can watch it. And yes, we were discussing why it's unsuccessful. It's more or less the same in Poland, where we have not expressly mentioned that natural person has to be the author or ought to be only the author, but it's added by professors and judges, Polish judges. So reinterpretation is possible without a change of law.
Always
But
is.
your book intersects with various concepts of robots' rights, such as robots as slaves, digital peculium, bundle theory of personhood, reliability regimes, Pietrzykowski's non-personal subject of law, and few others. Can you
Sure.
see any dominating theory that we are close to have it implemented in laws all around the world, or it's just a theory so far and requires adoption?
Yeah, so the real challenge right now, and this is what I've taken up in the new book, Person Thing Robot, is we're trying to use moral and legal categories that we've inherited from the Romans. From Gaius, we get this idea that in law there are two entities. There are either subjects of law, persons, or objects of law, things. And we have to sort of divide the world into one category or the other. This is how corporations became persons, because it wasn't adequate to have them be just things in the face of legal challenges. We needed them to be a subject. And so they became persons. It's a fiction, but it's still personhood to recognize that they fit in that category. What we're encountering right now, I think, is a inability to really easily fit the robot into either category. There's attempts to try to make the robot play the role of a thing, be just a tool, an instrument, whatever. But there's something about these things that are not quite things. For example, we say thank you to Alexa, right? We're polite
Mhm.
to various AI chatbots when we're not polite to our hammers and our calculators, right? There's something weird going on there. On the other hand, trying to make them persons is seemingly abrasive to a lot of our intuitions with regards to how we use the term personhood. I mean, it's very possible that we could extend corporate personhood to the AI, but obviously that opens the possibility of creating shell companies and all kinds of other problems in the way in which we decide accountability, responsibility, liability, things like this. So there's been a lot of challenge to try to make it fit one or the other. And as a result of that, there's been a few proposals to sort of reform the moral and legal categories we work with, saying, okay, maybe it's not mutually exclusive person or thing. Maybe we need some stuff in between that, is sort of one and the other, a both and kind of thing. And unfortunately, the Romans already had this. They had slaves. So slaves were considered property of the master, so they were things, but they could act as persons in business transactions on their master's behalf. And so under Roman law, there was a way in which the slave was kind of a both and, a thing and a person. And there's been some proposals from a number of legal scholars that the way that we solve the problem of the person thing in the face of the robot or the AI is to reactualize Roman slave law, which troubles me a bit because it really is put forward by a lot of white guys who aren't thinking about the fact that a lot of humans live under the, memory of human slavery in ways, and there's still human slavery, right?
Yes.
So slavery might not be the best, even though it's a legal solution, it may not be the best solution socially speaking. So there's other ones like gradient personhood, like the digital peculium. Everybody's struggling to recategorize the robot and make it fit our legal structures. But what it does say to us is that maybe this person-thing dichotomy we inherited from the Romans is at a point where it's reaching its own limitations, and that we need a new moral and legal ontology that is a little more fine-grained in understanding the challenges and the opportunities we face with different kinds of things like AI and robots.
It's really interesting theory. What practical outcome should we take from this theory? What should we do right now? Because AI is spreading, and I prepared a report that some thousands of lawyers think that AI will be widespread in the legal world in 2 years. So what should we do? What should we take from your theory?
Yeah, so I guess the best thing to take is that if we find ourselves struggling to fit the robot into the thing or the person category, there's a good reason for that. The categories themselves may already be too limiting and too restrictive. Now, how do we change those categories? Obviously, that's big, right? That's stuff that has to have really top-down kind of alterations in our legal structures. But I think we can see already ways in which in different parts of the world, some experimentation is going on with recategorizing things and creating new legal structures to accommodate AI and robots. I think oftentimes we are under the assumption that we've got to have one way of doing this. But I think right now you see a plurality of different ways of coming at this. And I think it's going to be, a good 5-10 years for us to sort of struggle through this. But I think a lot can be learned by comparative law, by looking at what other people are doing elsewhere in the world and learning from each other and saying, what's working, what's not working, what sorts of experiments have, turned out well, which ones haven't gone so well. And, how can we incorporate these into the manner by which we reform our current systems? So it's one of these things where it's not like what one person can do. It's more of a community and the way that we respond together to these challenges.
It's one of my tasks recording this podcast to get this comparative approach, to get all these interesting views from different parts of the world, from many countries. David, thank you for a great discussion. I think your theory should be adopted and we should rethink the person and include robots because they are really our stakeholders.
Yeah, and you're doing good work, so keep it up. Thanks.
Thank you for joining this podcast, and you guys join our next episode. Thumbs up, subscribe, and David, thank you for being here.
Thank you.